Welcome to the Flore Fantasy and Sci-Fi Lore. Today we're going to be talking about H.R. Giger. We'll begin with his childhood and some of the events in his life that inspired his work and his fascination with death. We will talk about kind of the psychology of bringing your nightmares to life and some of the influences on the biomechanical sexual nature of his creations. We will dive into his traveling to Hollywood and the reasons for that initially and how he got picked up on the Alien project. We will talk about the creature that he created and many other contributions he made into that film and the others that he worked on in part, and his reason for eventually leaving the franchise that his monster really created. We'll talk on about the impact that the movie had on the art world and his own art and how it changed so many different things for the rest of his life. If that is what you're looking for, this is the episode for you. Roll the intro.
Do you remember the first story that was so spellbinding it drove you to break the rules and stay up all night to keep reading, keep watching, keep playing? So good, you forgot your life and lived there?
So good. The moment it ended, you asked yourself, what next?
Welcome to the Flore. Our goal is to take you back, take you deeper, to explore and understand more, and relive that childlike wonder.
Join us as we dive deep into humanity's greatest stories, no matter how they are told, through books, movies, television, even games.
One of us does an in-depth research on the topic. One of us is familiar with the topic.
And one of us knows nothing. So the right questions will always be asked and addressed for anyone coming into the topic, regardless of how much you know.
Enjoy another world, another adventure, another spellbinding story. Join us on the Flore.
Hello and welcome back. Today we are going to get back into the Xenoverse. But as Alien Romulus is going to be set place between Alien and Aliens.
Oh, I didn't know that was the time frame on this.
Yes. This is while Ripley is floating in space for 63 years. So I didn't want to move forward with it. Rather, let's maybe step back a little bit. So I wanted to cover Giger. H.R. Giger. And then just talk about him, his involvement, and all of that. So, Giger was born, Hans is his name. He was born in 1940 Switzerland. This is during the wartime. There were bombings were a whole big thing about him and growing up. He grew up in a home with blackout curtains and only dark blue light bulbs, right, to avoid nighttime bombings. Right. An event that would end him, his family, his neighbors, everyone he had ever met, right? So the fear of death was always present since he was born and stays with him throughout his entire life. There's one time there's a mummy from Egypt in a local museum that they had on display, and he would force himself to go up and stand near it and look at it to face his fear, right? Because he felt like this is him being so close to death, looking at this mummy. And he would do this over and over again, day after day, right? This was, and even into his old age, he had a human skull that he would just hold because of how uncomfortable it was to hold death, right? He very much, for him, the fear of death is almost like a daily task to face. Right. It was just something you did. And he very much approached it of like, I will sit quietly with this feeling. His art, if you've seen it, it's very adult art.
Yes.
But it is very dark, very bleak, very sad, very cold, familiar yet twisted, pleasure with its sexual overtones, but pain.
Yes. So, I mean, this is
forms.
kind of a big tangent here, but Freud talked a lot about this fear and fascination with death that people have. And for Freud as well, it was very much entangled with sexual desire, right? Because sexual reproduction is the only way you transcend death in any way, right? There is a piece of you that lives on if you have children. And so for Freud, these two are very entangled. And I think we see a similar entanglement with Giger's work, right? You have this profound and intense fear of death and the idea that the only way to transcend death is through the sexual act.
Interesting. Hadn't thought about that. One of the things that Giger kind of says about death is like, that is eternity, right? That, like, for him, death is the end of the line. There's nothing more than that, right? And so for him, stepping into death is to step into the eternal. Also, in his art, you see these creatures, if you will, and they're trapped in these twisted forms that look almost painful, right? And very much his art holds majesty from the dark parts of the human soul. For Giger, this art was his therapy. These were his nightmares, his demons, right? And something he would say about his art is, you have to come face to face with your dark side before you can seek the light.
So Brandon Sanderson recently had a book, I think it was Yumi and the Nightmare Painter. And in this world, there are these nightmares that invade the city. And the way that they're conquered is that these artists go out and they paint them. And then they transform that painting and the nightmare in it into something that is not terrifying, that is acceptable. And so, I mean, while Giger's work does tend to have that terrifying piece, there is kind of that element there, that if I take the nightmare that is shifting and somewhat vague, but, also terrifying, and I make it something far more concrete and real, then I can face it.
Yeah, bringing it to light.
Yeah.
Right. Demons, they hide in the shadows, and there's, I can feel that. He likes to call his unique style biomechanical, the mixing of organic and mechanical things with like these industrial kind of vibes, And he's not just a painter. He was a sculptor as well, right? So he would often have these sculptures that he was creating. He used airbrush for his art, rarely stepping outside of black and white, right? Like,
a lot of it.
Tiny bit of brown, tiny bit of blue.
Yeah, a lot of his work is just black and white. Yeah.
He's also one who he wouldn't make sketches or anything. He would just start going and go and let it create itself in front of him, saying that he would surprise himself, right? When he would paint, which is something that people who make his size art and stuff would just, kind of blows them away. That, that is his style that he goes for. He just starts with a little doodle, and then it just grows.
Just seems what happened.
So Giger publishes his compendium of images called the Necronomicon.
Yeah, I did see that he calls it the Necronomicon. That was interesting. I mean, I guess you're right. He has this fascination with death. And I guess for him, those alien, terrifying creatures, that was him bringing the nightmare of death to flesh, as opposed to the Reaper with the scythe. It is this creature with the head.
Yeah. But it's also, I think, a nod to H.P. Lovecraft, right? He's saying, like, he's inspired by H.P. Lovecraft, as H.P. Lovecraft also liked to use the Necronomicon in his stories. It's got some meaning there. Anyways, but this is what, really gained a lot of attraction for him. It wasn't published in the United States. And so a lot of Americans didn't see this book. And then after that book is published, he is hired on for the art project Dune, Jodorowsky's Dune. And this is where he's going to meet Dan O'Bannon. And Dan O'Bannon will then look at his artwork and be like, oh, this is amazing.
Yeah.
Just a couple weeks after Giger gets there, right? And they like see him, they ship him in from Hollywood. A couple weeks later, project's dead, right? Falls through. Jodorowsky's Dune never gets made. And then Dan O'Bannon is like, well, I've got a whole movie lined up here. And then he gets Ridley Scott on, shows Ridley Scott the Necronomicon, and he also immediately falls in love with it and is like,
Yeah.
oh yeah, this is our guy. This is our monster.
Well, and I think we've talked about this before. I mean, the difference between the Alien franchise and another, monster movie of the month is the Alien. It is Yeager's creation, right? That it is so unique. It is so terrifying that it creates a franchise instead of a one-off.
Right. In fact, it's Ridley Scott who says that this was more than just a monster. It was far too real to just fit inside of the monster kind of genre, right? Like he doesn't fit next to Frankenstein, the Mummy, Dracula, right? It stands apart from all of that.
So, well, you say that it stands apart, but I mean, at the same time, the Mummy, Dracula, Frankenstein, these are monster creatures that have been in the story lexicon for hundreds, some even over 1,000 years. And I think the Alien in its own way takes its place there, right? It became such an iconic monster creature that it became a story that we just kept telling over and over and over. The Xenomorph,
Well, also, I would say at this point in time is just as recognizable as those monsters.
Yeah. And so I'm saying, it feels very different, but at the same time, it really just tapped into these deep fears, And I guess even nowadays we see the Frankenstein, the Mummy, falling somewhat on the wayside. Vampires still show up fairly often, but they really got adopted by the romance genre, so they're less terrifying now. And
right, we had sparkly ones a little bit ago.
So, well, and the sparkly ones is really what gave birth to this genre. Like there was always this sexual component to vampires, but at the end of that, they were going to eat you, right?
Right. And then Twilight made it more of a
and then Twilight,
your loyal husband.
So, and I mean, you don't see a ton of it in movies and television, but you do see some of it. But in books, it exploded. It became its own genre after that.
Gotcha.
But there are a few. A Discovery of Witches, The Vampire Diaries. There were a few that made it onto the big screen beyond just Twilight. But yeah, it's really shifted the way we think about vampires now.
Mm-hmm. So anyways, Giger gets hired on for Alien, and he's the art director. He's making drawings and then taking it to small scale sculptures and doing all of this, and the people working with him were really fascinated with his work. His first mock-up of the Xenomorph, he used the vertebrae of a snake for its back and tail, but he also was using pieces of a Rolls-Royce car to help build his original model before they went and made it a full suit, right? Yeah. But that's classic with his biomechanical nature of things, right? He's like, I want to take something that was living and a vehicle.
So an interesting thing that I came across just within that biomechanical is if we look at the Blade Runner, right? There is kind of this biomechanical stuff going on, particularly with the robots. And I believe it was Ridley Scott who basically says, he's like, yeah, that original Blade Runner, that's part of the Xenoverse, right?
Yeah. Yeah, and he's even slipped in some Easter eggs in there as well. And he really wanted them to be a part of each other. That the Xenomorph, like the alien, is the future from Blade Runner.
Yeah.
And a lot of people are like, we get that you want to do that, but you already messed up the robots. Right.
Well, and I think the idea is that, and I saw this hinted at, is Wayland worked at, I don't even remember the name of the company in Blade Runner, and then went on to make his own robots that are different, and his kind of took over the market. Maybe they were cheaper, safer, who knows, right? But that's how you get that shift from what we have in Blade Runner to what we have in Alien, is that Wayland, I guess Robotics was just the better company, and the other one went under.
Tyrell Corporation.
Tyrell.
Yeah.
So Wayland works at Tyrell, then leaves, starts his own company, and Tyrell goes under. It's kind of like the idea of like the LED flat screen versus the plasma. The plasma was a superior picture, but the cost of the product was so much more that the LED flat screen just killed that market. They don't make plasma TVs anymore, right? Because the LED flat screen was made for such a cheaper price. You could get a bigger TV, a lot more people could do it, and they took the market. And I think perhaps that is the story of Wayland and Tyrell. Tyrell had a superior product. Wayland was producing it at a fourth the cost and just took over the market.
All right. And, an Android probably isn't a cheap thing, and it's like probably equivalent to buying a new car, right? And if somebody's building a car that's maybe a little bit worse, but 4 times cheaper, people are going to buy that.
People are going to buy that, yeah. So I think that's how I match up those timelines, because they're like, the Tyrell Corp had these better androids, right? They were far superior. But the story of the plasma TV and the LED TV.
Yeah. So for Ridley Scott's Xenoverse, they are part of the same world. I think for other directors, they are like, we're not sure we've really lined everything up well enough there.
Right.
Especially with Alien Resurrection, the 4th movie, they return to Earth at the very end of that. And in Blade Runner, Earth is being abandoned at that time because it is now no longer viable. Like in the book, everyone who goes outside has to be wearing a smog mask, or people you'll be dead in a few days by breathing outside air.
Wow.
It is very much like we're just unfortunately not rich enough to leave Earth yet.
I remember. I do now. I mean, people don't. The air's not that bad in the movie, but I do remember, like, everybody talking about just wanting to get Earth. And I even remember specifically, like, he asked if that's a real snake, and she's like, "If I could afford a real snake, I wouldn't be on this terrible planet."
Yeah. It's also the greenhouse effect has also ran away. Like outside, it's like 120 degrees, right? So like moving around outside is already a huge problem. Anyone that can leave has already left. Anyone left behind is working to leave.
Yeah. Anyway, back to Giger.
One of the other things, so, he made the eggs, the ovomorphs, and for the close-up shot, he had used sheep guts for that inside, right? So he was very much getting his hands like in the kind of macabre area, and it was creeping people out. They call him Dracula because of how he dressed and his demeanor. He definitely came to Hollywood, and people were like, "Who is this guy? What is going on?" The Xenomorph, is plucked out of his art and brought to life in Alien. But perhaps it is best to put it the other way around, that Giger brought his nightmare to Alien. Right? Now, Giger, he's only credited for like design and creation of the alien, but he did so much more. So first, it's the landscape of the unknown planet. That's later on LV-426 or Archon, where Hadley's Hope is. He designs the ships, the derelict ships, its exterior, its look, its interior, hallway, the egg chamber where all the eggs are, the cockpit, and the space jockey, right? He is creating all of this. He was very hands-on. Like, he didn't just design it. He was hands-on in it the entire time, working on all of this stuff and making it come to life. Obviously, he's also very involved in making the actual suit that the guy will wear to be the alien. But I mention this because he doesn't get as much credit as he should have gotten. Right.
Well, and I think when it comes to Hollywood movies and TV shows, everybody's fighting for a piece of credit because it's how you get your next job. Sometimes it's how you get a percent. Sometimes people are not given all the credit they deserve, just so more of it can be spread around so other people can grow their careers,
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and I think a lot of that did happen. Oh, yeah, the face huggers, he made those. He was working on a whole temple set area that they were going to have this alien ship next to a temple, and he was designing that temple, an access shaft down the middle, and then putting a whole, like, more temple-looking egg chamber in this location rather than in the derelict ship. But that whole got scrapped because of budget, right? They're like, we don't have enough money for the temple, so we're just going to put the egg chamber in the ship. So that's what they did. That is what Giger's initial involvement is. He's not involved in Alien 2. They do bring him back for Alien 3. But, as I was saying, he's creeping people out. They kind of push him out of the franchise and just give him credit for the designing the original Alien. But even in Alien 4, so when he first gets hired on, he drew up 2 concept arts for the Xeno, and was like, which one do you want? And they picked one. That's the one they made. In 4, they picked this one and used that. He didn't get anything for it, but they straight up took that alien and put it in 4. Anyway,
I think it's funny. He's like, dude, you know that guy we brought on to design all our creepy stuff? He's creepy. Like, I feel like that's self-explanatory. Like, like, there's a reason he's good at what he does. Like, it's just who he is.
Right. He's also an artist that you're paying to come work on your movie. Whereas everyone else there is like, the movie was the end goal, right? I want to work on movies.
Yeah.
And he's like, oh, I just have my art, and I would make it whether people looked at it or not. It's for me.
Yeah.
And you liked it, wanted me on here. After Giger's success, his art becomes very popular. So popular that it upsets the art world. The kind of venues that would show Giger's art were not set up for that amount of people waiting to see his art, right? These places were built up to hold a few dozen people. After Alien, they came by the hundreds and even the thousands.
So they're just like
be a venue who's like we fit 120 people. It's a 10-minute walk down a corridor, down a stairwell, into a basement, and there's gonna be ear music, and there's 2,000 people waiting outside.
Yeah.
I don't know what to do with this, you know.
Yeah.
And so the popularity of this upset the art world because of that. They became over flooded with people who were just alien
wanting to see
now.
wanting to see all the other stuff that he created. That monster's just so iconic.
Yeah. They just wanted more of it. So let's see. All right, I talked about how they brought him back for Alien 3. Did a little bit of work in Prometheus and Covenant, but I think that's more just working with Ridley Scott again, right? But yeah, they definitely Fox, who owned Alien at the time, didn't like him and booted him out, and just kind of held on to his art. And you know, I do think we would have gotten the higher quality creepiness if they would have kept him in, and treated him like this is your baby, rather than being like, yeah, we just wanted this, thank you.
Yeah. Well, and you see this a lot, particularly when these big corporations buy up these properties and they don't really understand them, right?
Mm-hmm.
You know, was it the Wachowski who made The Matrix, right? In the latest release of The Matrix, they have a whole scene where essentially they're telling us, we didn't want to make this movie. They made us, and they were going to make it with or without us. And so we decided they would do it with us, right? Like, they're like, hey, by the way, this is what the corporation did to us, you know? And you see that with, like, Disney, you know, originally they seemed to understand the Marvel audience, but at some point something happened and they didn't. They understood the Star Wars audience. Something happened and they didn't. Because you've got these corporate, you know, executives and overseers, you know, just rotating chairs trying to make more money because that's all they do. Most of them have no connection to the properties they're managing, you know. And you see that in the way that they fail to understand their audience a lot, you know. And that's just when a big corporation gets your hands on it, you know, maybe the guy who buys it gets it and he's able to take it and do awesome things, you know. And then at some point, he retires, he goes to work for a different corporation, and the next guy doesn't, you know, and he just sits down and be like, how do we get more money out of this?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. And it blows up in their face. So we've seen that a lot with a lot of the franchises, you know. And for the audience, we're just confused. We're like, what happened? And it was just, you know, all these executives making these choices and getting, you know, promotions or leaving and going to work for other companies, retiring. And so you don't, you know, it's not always the same people managing these projects.
Giger also respected people who were creating art, not people who were just signing checks, right?
Mm-hmm.
And so I think he kind of offended some people.
So the
Holy were money, and he was like, "You're useless.
You're
not going to excite anything." Yeah. Which also is kind of on brand for Alien.
That's the story. The corpse is awful. Waylon, you Johnny's the worst.
Yeah. So, Giger did pass away in 2014, but he has definitely left his mark on this world. He brought his nightmares to life, but they will definitely live on in our nightmares.
Yeah. Alien gave me nightmares as a kid, man.
Yeah, it's a good one.
It will give you nightmares, man. That's what it's supposed to do, and it does it. It does it. All right. Do you have a treasure room question for us?
I most certainly do. If there was something you would want to have gigafied, what would you gigafy?
All right. We'll talk about that in the treasure room. Hope you enjoyed this episode. We have learned that many of our fans are only interested in some of the worlds we cover. The podcast feed is just a list, and we have no control over that. But if you go to either the Patreon site or YouTube, there are collections and playlists that can easily access all the things you're interested in. On the Patreon site, there are even tags to hunt down even more specific things. Everything that is free in the podcast is still free there. It's just a better organization of the episodes. We have covered D&D, Baldur's Gate, Cyberpunk, Dune, Fallout, the origin of comics, DC and Marvel, Aliens, Predator, Godzilla, King Kong, The Witcher, and more. And if we haven't covered something you love, let us know, and we can add it to the list.